Hi, in this video we are going to talk about completing the square, and I'm going to add just a little bit of that dot dot dot, completing the square for a quadratic equation. Or we'll just put for a quadratic. Now, the reason we say it for a quadratic, remember the general form, and we'll need to refer back to this, that the general form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. And we've been factoring those. And now we're going to look at a specific pattern that's going to allow us to solve using the square root method we learned in the last lesson. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin with recognizing patterns. So first off, let's remind ourselves, what is a perfect square? A perfect square can be written as something squared. Can be written as a number squared. Okay, so let's look at some examples. There's some that I know you know. So, for example, we know that 25 is a perfect square because I can write 25 as 5 squared. We know that 16 is a perfect square because we can write it as 4 squared. Another one is we know that 100 is a perfect square because you can write that as 10 squared. But there's others as well. And so let's look at something else. So you can say, what if I have something like x squared? That's a perfect square. We don't know what it is, but it is a perfect square. Another perfect square would be x minus 3 squared. That's a perfect square because it's something squared. And you could even make it more complicated, but that's the idea. X plus 3, that could also be a perfect square. Now I have a question. If I gave you x squared plus 4, is that a perfect square? And the answer is you can't write it as something and something squared. You can't do it with a plus, you can't do it with a minus. Even though it is x squared, it does equal x squared plus 2 squared, but you can't write it as the whole thing as something squared. So this is an example that's not a perfect square. Okay, now let's see what happens when you have a perfect square. Say I have the perfect square of x minus 3 squared. Now, we're going to walk through this. Remember, this means x minus 3 times x minus 3. Now, then, we've done this before. We distribute. We would get an x squared. Then we get a minus 3x. Then when we do this again, we do it in magenta, we're going to get another minus 3x. And then we're going to get a negative 3 times a negative 3 for a positive 9. And then when we put all this back together, we get x squared minus 6x. Actually, let me do it this way. I'm going to back up a moment. Instead of writing it as 6x, I'm going to write it as, notice I have a minus 3x and then a minus 3x. I'm going to write it as 2 times plus 2 times the minus 3x plus 9. And your final form that you're most comfortable with is x squared minus 6x plus 9. Now let's try one right alongside it. How about x minus 4 squared? We'll do one more, and hopefully that'll get the pattern out for us. So remember, this is x minus 4, x minus 4, and then we distribute to get an x squared minus a 4x. Then we distribute again to get a minus another 4x, and then a minus 4 times a minus 4, we get a plus 16. And then negative 4x and then plus another 4x, that's the same as minus 2 of those, or x squared minus 8x plus 16. Now, we're going to do this next one faster, because what I want to show you is this pattern. Notice that if I have a 4 here in these positions, or a 4 in this position, that if I just take the 4 and I square it, I get my last term. That's the 16. And if I take my ending term here and I just double the 4, I get the minus 8x. So let's try this one again. Let's try an x plus 3 squared, but we're going to do it all at once now. We know that the first term gets squared. See, if I look at the first term, it's going to get squared. So that's an x squared. I know that my last term is always going to be positive, because it's when you're multiplying two numbers, they're always going to be positive. So I have a 3 times 3, that's a 9. And then my middle term here is going to be plus. I'm going to take my 3x and put it in here, but I'm going to multiply it by 2. So 2 times 3, that's going to be 6x. So let's try this again. Let's try an x minus 5 over here. We're going to do this all at once now. We know our first term is squared. We know our last term is going to be plus the 5 squared. This is the 5 squared. And then in the middle, we're going to have a 5x. We're going to have a minus 5x. But remember, it needs to be multiplied by a 2, because it's going to be doubled. We'd have x squared minus 10x plus 25. Okay, I would encourage you in the notes, there's a bunch of these to practice, and try doing them so that you can write them out immediately, just in one line. Okay, now, let's try this going the other direction. So, for example, if I give you the problem of x squared plus 8x plus blank equals something squared, the question is, how do we fill in that blank, and how do we complete the parentheses? Okay, well, notice the pattern. The pattern says is that whatever was in this front spot was the x squared. So this, the pink spot, gives me is just the x. Now, let's do this in a different color. How about orange? And then in this orange spot here, this orange spot comes from taking the blank, or comes from taking the orange x and squaring it to get this. So then the question is, and then remember that whatever this orange x was, it was doubled to be put into this position here with the 8x. So what would I have to double to get to an 8? The answer is 4. So that means that this became a plus 4, and this last position is at 16. Let's try another one. How about this? What if I gave you an x squared minus 14x plus something has to equal, put whatever goes in these parentheses, squared. In other words, somehow if we put the correct If we put just the right number here, then we know that we can write this polynomial as something squared. That's what we want to do. And the key comes from the negative 14. If we take the negative 14, take half of it. So let's take half of the minus 14. Well, half of minus 14 is minus 7. And that's the answer that we were looking for. In the parentheses, we have an x minus 7. And our orange question mark is negative 7 squared, which is 49. So practice these, and that is the technique for how you complete the square. Thanks for watching.